We're joined by Republican strategist and the CEO of Stampede Consulting, Chris Turner, and Democratic strategist Spencer Critchley. He joins us from Monterey, California. He was a communications advisor for each of Barack Obama's presidential elections. Welcome, gentlemen. Spencer, I think we'll start with you since we already mentioned President Obama. Let's take it from there. President Trump, he writes today that this is not the Obama administration or the administration of Sleepy Joe who let China get away with murder. Would you say that the president is correct? Because, you know, the unfair relationship with China didn't start now. It's been ongoing for years and nobody ever addressed it.
Well, I think he's right in that China has been problematic for many years with its behavior on the world trade scene. I think he's dead wrong in trying to make a comparison between himself and President Obama. President Obama was famous for having said, "Don't do stupid stuff in international relations." And as usual with what President Obama did, it appears that President Trump is determined to do the opposite. Yes, I think we do need to get tougher with China because of things like IP theft and all the rest of it. But getting tough doesn't have to mean being dumb. And that's what I think the key difference is. President Trump came into office and really tore apart a lot of great progress that President Trump had been making with the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, for example, and basically snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, I would say.
Chris, is President Trump doing stupid stuff with the Chinese?
Well, I actually appreciate the fact that Spencer and I are going to have some common ground. It is interesting, you know, I'm in Washington, D.C., and we've got, you know, the Nancy Pelosi's and Chuck Schumer's are happy to yap pretty much daily, or the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's or Ilhan Omar's are going to yap about pretty much anything President Trump does. But I don't hear that here in this town on either side. I think everybody agrees that the Chinese have engaged in some pretty egregious trade practices since they've entered the WTO, you know, back in 2001 or so. We're sitting at a massive trade deficit. I mean, if you can imagine that Canada, which is a country 1/10 our population, buys about 3 times the amount of goods as a country the size of China with 1.38 billion citizens, you realize that something in our trade relationship with that country is totally screwed up. And, you know, several years ago, when the president took office, I remember reading an interview with an industrial worker from the Midwest, and he was asked about this trade conflict and utilization of tariffs to try to right wrongs and whatnot. And the worker said, "Hey, you know, you guys in the media may not have understood that we've been in a trade war for decades, but those of us on the front lines have been feeling it for decades, and we've been the foot soldiers. And what we appreciate now with President Trump is that he's finally engaging on our behalf." And so, you know, I think this is just a natural progression. And I think that we saw, frankly, the markets rebounded today very nicely. So I think this is just kind of another link in the chain, and we'll get the deal done soon enough.
Yes, Chris, but everyone is telling us that eventually the U.S. consumers will be the ones, you know, that will be hurt. It will trickle down at some point. President Trump is betting on the long game, but, you know, in the meantime, consumers will pay the price for it. What if the end game means that, you know, the U.S. is losing in the competition?
Well, remember, no consumer goods are being affected by this first tranche of the upgrade in tariffs from 10% to 25%. So there's going to be a little bit of a lag time. You know, President Trump is quite a wise negotiator, so he's given himself some buffer. Again, going back to that industrial worker in the Midwest from a couple of years ago, remember, you know, these are people, millions of Americans, who wouldn't be able to buy a thing because they wouldn't have a job.
I want to give Spencer some time to reply.
If the president hadn't engaged on their behalf. You bet.
Spencer, take it.
Yeah, sure. I agree with a point that Chris made in there. I disagree strenuously that President Trump is a master negotiator. I think his fraudulence has been exposed day by day, especially recently, and the whole art of the deal thing has been exposed as a fiction. But the important point that I do agree about is I think that one area where Democrats really got it wrong was in not paying attention to those Midwestern industrial workers closely enough. And the fond hope, of course, was that with international trade deals, the overall increase in wealth, which we have seen, would be distributed more fairly, because if people found their jobs were disrupted, there would be things like retraining and replacement programs to help people who used to work in a factory maybe start a new career. Unfortunately, I don't think any of that took place at the level that was necessary, and those people do feel abandoned, and I think they're right to feel abandoned.
We have to wrap it and leave it there. Thank you both, Chris Turner and Spencer Critchley, for a very polite debate.